Good morning, hat nerds. It is Luke with the sixth installment of Hat Chat. Uh, yeah, made it all the way to number six. So happy Saturday to everybody well, I'm still talking to myself, but that's okay. Um, we'll see if we actually get some participation today. Um, so far, pretty good little Saturday. Let's see here. Um, okay, just making sure that my stream is up and ready. And yeah, anxious to get this underway. Um, Today I'm wearing my Moores Homburg. Again, I couldn't tell you a whole heck of a lot about how old this hat is. It does seem to be not a super duper old hat. Basically, this is one of the hats I just haven't poured in the research into as of yet, but doesn't matter. I love this hat. So it was just a good day for Hamburg. I'll wait a little bit for folks to start cycling in if anybody does. Otherwise, it'll be another monologue, but that's okay. I am okay with that. Let's see. Just making sure that I am live like I said I was. And it looks like, all right, excellent. I don't know if anybody caught the segment yesterday, but actually we had a visitor. We had MCOX 4700 from the Fedora Lounge join us, and I think he caught me right as I was talking about um, the situation with the Kennedy administration in terms of like the hat, how it fits into hat history, and just the fact that really kind of was an administration that kind of ushered into a new era of our leader here in this United States opting not to go with a fine hat. We mentioned how presidents prior to John F. Kennedy would always be seen in either some sort of Homburg or some sort of other fine hat, let's say a top hat per se. Kennedy was somebody that bucked that trend, but did also feel, at least according to the historians, armchair and otherwise, did feel some of the heat for making that call. But what we did know is that the call that he made was something that was echoed throughout it was probably just a reflection of the times, right? So Kennedy was somebody that probably opted to use product in his hair, and had that finely tuned coif that he was so famous for. And yeah, he was just somebody that like, no, I'm not wearing a hat. I can still be a fine president and not wear a fine hat. And well, obviously that I don't think, this is one of the things that we mentioned in the live stream yesterday, that I don't necessarily buy into kind of some of the assertions that caused the waning of the hat industry. It's probably more of a reflection of a hat industry that was already on the downside to begin with, right? As I was mentioning when I was conversing with MCOX, was that probably in all likelihood that industry was already on the downside, and it was probably more along the lines of the rapid rise in the accessibility to the automobile that happened around that time, right? So, even though cars hadn't already existed for quite a bit, I think right around the time hatch started getting out of favor is when, everybody started to have access to the means, right? We know that we had an economic boom post World War II in the US. And that probably that affluence that we experienced, that golden era that we experienced here in the United States, was probably had a lot to do with having access to cars, and that access to a car probably made people rethink whether they needed to wear a hat on their head. So now you're driving to work, you're driving to the supermarket, you're no longer having to walk or take public transport, and you no longer needed that protection from the elements, that functional basis of the hat. So style started evolving accordingly. So hats definitely didn't die, but they did start to wane around that time. It's just a matter of who you talk to in terms of like whether they think that was the cause. As much power as I think a president would hold or would wield, I just don't think people were like, well, the president's not wearing a hat, so I'm not gonna. It's just harder for me to buy. But doesn't mean it's not true. I've seen, um, I could think that there's still, wilder connections that one could make. But certainly for me, my personal opinion is the idea that there was a cultural shift that probably had to do with the affluence that we experienced, that made the wearing of and purchasing of fine hats just something that just didn't have as much utility as it did prior to that time period. So um, anyway, fun conversation. I'm happy to go into that again if anybody wants to. But if anybody else has any other topics that they'd like to go to, that's also fine. One thing that I thought about in terms of trying to do some of these, so when I'm kind of stuck doing a monologue, is to kind of have something prepared. And one thing that I wanted to do, and again, this would probably be better served with an audience, but I do kind of want to speak to one of the underlying themes from our live stream, which is, what kind of collector, right? So everybody has a theme. We know that a lot of our folks on the Fedora Lounge will have their own specific theme, right? So we have folks that will only collect and display vintage hats, right? And depending on who you talk to, that cutoff period about what's vintage or not, I feel like one of the observations that I've managed to hold is that right around the 1970s, right? The 70s seem to be kind of, and that specific era, that specific decade is also very divisive, right? One of the Facebook groups that I belong to is catered to only hats pre 1960, right? There goes that Kennedy era designation again, where that group seems to cater to just folks that were from hats made prior to the Kennedy administration. Again, it's not a coincidence. I think the 60s and 70s are kind of that transition period. MCOX made a great observation that I had not thought of, but made perfect sense, which is like the rise of the hippie movement, right? In the 60s and 70s. And you had things like Woodstock and just the idea of growing one's hair out. So, right, we talked about, JFK's sense of style and his tightly done coif, but there was also the hippie movement, right? So you had a bunch of hippies that were growing their hair long as kind of maybe like a form of rebelling counterculture. And I gotta think that also had an impact. So regardless of whether or not you lived in that time and you consider yourself a hippie, I gotta imagine that you probably were influenced by a lot of that kind of movement. So maybe you were, if you didn't have a long mane of hair, maybe you still grew your hair out a little longer than you typically would, only because you wanted to fit in. One of the main things and main topics, revolving around the human existence is the idea of wanting to fit in. And we know that is a general need or desire, but there's a spectrum, right? There's an individual difference in one's desire to fit in with the predominant culture that exists. And that's why you have subcultures that prop up and gain prominence. And I think that's what we're living in now, is kind of a fine hat subculture that we seem to have, going on, especially when we look at places like the Fedora Lounge. Besides the fact that there's still a functional use for a hat, and a fine hat maybe, because you have a brim. You have a brim that will probably provide varying levels of protection from the sun depending on the length of that brim. So you have folks that really opt for those 3-inch or larger brim sizes because they provide more functional protection from the sun, and they might also love the style. So I think where style meets function, that right there's a kind of like those two kind of forces are kind of combining, and a lot of that, it gets reflected in your theme for collecting hats, and I think that's fascinating. Well, so we are just over 10 minutes into our live stream. Yesterday's live stream was probably one of our shorter live streams. By short, I mean about an hour and a half, or just over an hour and a half. I don't know if that's a good format. For me, I like to let it happen organically. I don't want to have a set segment, at least until I get to the point where I have a little bit more continuity and I have a little more consistency in how I know I want the show to materialize. And nothing is going to be set in stone. Obviously, this is going to be ever evolving content as my brain, the wheels in my brain start turning and I start coming up with ideas, and also listen to some of the feedback from folks that actually consume the content. So I don't know. I'm somebody that likes and craves consistency, some sort of schedule, even though I'm bad at creating schedules. When I do finally get around to creating a schedule, and I am somebody that likes to stick to that schedule, unless there's a very good reason to deviate from it. But I find that there is kind of that need for consistency in general. And so right now, the way things are panning out is that I'm doing these hat chats every day. They're roughly sometime in the morning. I've done, I think, 1 or 2 hat chats in the afternoon, and that's fine. I'm not opposed to doing that. But what I'd like to do is just settle on some consistent schedule, because I feel like that will, one, provide a good jumping off point, and if the demand is there, maybe I will either create another hat chat, so just another hat chat segment to serve some of our folks who are it's more convenient for them because they live in a different time zone. So I'm not opposed to that. It's all based on how much energy I have to get this stuff all done. Right now, I have tons of energy to be able to do these every day, but maybe that'll change next week or next month or next year. I just will let it happen organically. But yeah, I mean, so far I've been having a lot of fun. This has been like, I've had 2 core interactions with some fellow hat nerds here, and they were the highlights, I think, of the segment and series so far. I think once the word gets out, and like I said, I think even just having one person here besides myself, bloviating with me, that way we can kind of have a dialogue. I think that's more than enough to kind of hold the content together. And who knows, like I said, if I get a regular visitor on here and they're interested in co-hosting all these with me, I am more than happy to do that. I just think that it's going to be of more value to the end user and of the content to have more than just me sitting here blabbing and doing a monologue. But the nice thing is that right now I am well caffeinated. I have my my cute mug, my Goma and peach mug, yeah, I'm gonna just enjoy this Saturday. I've already went for, if you listen to our past live streams, you know that I've been trying to walk a lot more, right? So one of the things in terms of like the evolution of Luke over the course of this week as well as this month and into this year and into next year, hopefully, is uh, getting back into a regular schedule of walking. I just find that it energizes me. It gives me a good place. Like I do a lot of self-reflection during my walks. So my hope is that continue to keep that going because I feel like I have a hell of a lot more energy after I get back from the walk to be able to sit here in front of the camera and do these segments. So hopefully that translates into better content. I don't know, no promises, but I think that that could only be a good thing for my viewers. When I finally do have a steady stream of viewers. Um, I mean, I'm looking at some of the channel analytics. I am getting kind of an uptick. So, regardless of whether folks are tuning in and commenting, I am getting folks that are clicking links, and I appreciate that. Like I said, nobody here is obligated. Just because I call on for you to provide a comment doesn't mean you have to. If you want to passively listen to me bloviate, I am more than happy to do that. I just don't know. I can't vouch for the quality of that. So you're kind of at the mercy of whatever pops into my head at the moment. And speaking of, one of the things that I did want to talk about, in this segment was this idea of vintage hats, right? So I've already shown some pieces in my collection. I started off this series by wearing my Knox Tom and Jerry, and that hat, if I'm correct in the dating of that hat, it's probably someplace in the 60s. So not super vintage, depending on who you ask, but old enough hat and a well-loved hat, and probably one of my favorite hats that I own. And I actually had that hat on because I use it all the time. I had that hat on for the first several segments, I believe. And regardless of who you ask, it's still to me. Well, if you ask Luke, it's a vintage hat. You ask somebody else, they might say, "Well, that's not so vintage." Whatever have you. But it got me curious into asking, what theme, right? We talked about every collector has a theme, a model, some sort of guiding principle around their collection. And I guess my question to you, regardless of whether you're on this live stream, if you're watching this and you want to post a comment, is, what kind of theme do you incorporate into your collection, right? So there's a really useful function for having a theme, right? For me, I don't know. My theme is I tend to steer towards vintage hats, preferably something like 1970s or older, right? So a hat older than me is kind of my preference. Now, again, I'm not limited to that, right? So as far as I know, from my gathering of research, this hat that I have on right now is probably not older than me, right? I base that off of, again, happens to be a piece that I got from Kevin Gerber, and Kevin has an opinion that the hat is of the 1930s, only because of the patina on the band. I don't know if it comes across on camera, but this is definitely a well-worn hat. It's a beautiful felt, but Kevin's position is that this hat is some type of 1930s hat. And again, I didn't really, when I purchased this, it didn't really matter to me. It looked old, it looked well loved, and but the research that I happen to do, this is probably upside down. Let me actually turn it right side up for you. So one of the things that jumped out at me was, the brown sweatband, right? So anybody that you ask for, in terms of like, you tend to find a lot more vintage pieces with the brown sweatband, right? And usually I'm just going to throw out 1950s, right? So this definitely has the brown sweatband, but uh, this is a European hat. So, right. So Moores is based out of the UK. And what we find is with the European hats, including the Italian Borsalinos, is that the brown sweatband kind of rubric doesn't apply. Like a lot of European brands have been using brown sweatbands for quite a long time after the heyday of the domestic hats. So, like your Hat Corporation of America, your Stetsons, all the brands that are known that are US brands, they kind of shifted, I guess, I want to say the 1950s. So after the 1950s into the 60s, into what more of the black sweatbands. Maybe that was a cost cutting thing. I don't know, what have you. The folks that know that kind of history will be in a better in line to tell you. So maybe that was what Kevin was using. But one other useful rubric for dating hats are the little emblems. I'm going to go with labels or emblems. And you can see here, if my camera's picking this up, you can see it says Moores, and it says London, New York, and Paris. And for the folks that kind of are in the know, and again, I'm not going to put myself in that category, but the folks that kind of know about the more British hat makers and the ones that, especially the ones that are more expert on Moores, the way I understood it based on the input that I received was that that label is a much more modern label, probably indicative of something like 1980s or 1990s even. Doesn't matter to me one bit how old the hat on. We got a viewer that just joined us. Welcome. Feel free to post a comment if you like. But I was just showing off my Moores Homburg here, my hat of the day. And I was just talking about my attempts to try to find the date of manufacture. This was a hat I picked up, one of the vintage pieces I picked up from Kevin Gerber. And Kevin had his assertion is that the hat is probably from the 1930s. I think a lot of that is based off of like either how he procured the hat and obviously the heavy patina that's shown on the sweatband and the brim. Doesn't matter to me one bit. I guess that was kind of like the main. I mean, interest. It matters to me in that I like to know a little bit more about the actual date of the hat, because a lot of the research that I've done informally is that it's probably a newer hat, maybe 1980s or 1990s. I believe Moores is still making hats. Maybe they're not. Regardless, it didn't make one bit of difference as to whether I wanted the hat. Yeah, 1930s hat is cool and all. But this hat I love this hat. But that might make I guess the real point in all of this is that might make a huge difference to some other collector that would say, nice hat. It doesn't have a place in my collection because I only collect pre-1960s or pre-1950s or pre-whatever. I don't know. Maybe somebody only collects 1930s and older hats. Whatever your theme is, that is okay. It's useful, right? Having a collection theme is useful or not useful, depending on how you look at it. But for me, I think of it in economic terms and in terms of practical terms, right? Having some sort of guiding principle for your collection allows you to not have to buy and acquire every single hat that you come across, right? So, obviously there's the distinction of like fine hats, or fine fedoras. I only do fedoras. No bowlers, no pork pies, no Homburgs, and no flat caps, none of that stuff. I only do fedoras. That's useful. I mean, I think that it's useful because one, it allows you to appreciate your collection that much more, right? That you stuck to your theme, and let's say somehow you broke away from your theme. I know we've all experienced that, where in the course of collecting, you said, I only gonna get, let's say, vintage pieces. And then you find this modern piece that just speaks to you, and you break your rubric, you break your theme. Um, and it might just be temporary, right? Maybe when you saw that hat that broke your theme, you're like, I'm gonna make an exception because I gotta have that hat. And that's because it fired off that dopamine hit, that dopamine shot that we all kind of know we get when we come across that hat that really pulls us. But doesn't mean it will always do that, right? So we know that we have pieces that we pulled the trigger on that somehow, some way, that dopamine, that initial dopamine hit doesn't last. Like when you, upon reviewing and living with the hat, right? That's something that we kind of like to say here in the house, is like, let's see how it lives. Um, and somehow in living with the hat that you acquired, that initial dopamine shot doesn't take, and you start seeing all the things that you start maybe re-understanding or reappreciating why you had a theme to begin with, and the hat just doesn't do it for you anymore. And then that's when you kind of just pull out the hat and maybe either formally put it on sale, or just somebody just happens to like the hat. Maybe they have the same pull that got you to buy the hat, and then you let it go and you find it a new home. And maybe the funds that you recuperated from the hat purchase will allow you to purchase another hat that is better suited for your theme. But that's the fun in collecting these things, you know. And again, you know, no offense to anybody that's just a straight collector and not a wearer, but I'm just somebody that tries to wear his hats, you know. So even though, like, I do, well, in my previous iteration, I had a hat wall that I used to kind of appreciate the hat. There was a functional basis for it. So besides aesthetics, it was also a really good means to kind of scan my wall and be able to choose the hat I wanted to have that day. Again, back to like a previous mention, doesn't mean that that's great to do, right? You know, having more hats, it doesn't, even though it sounds like it's a good thing, sometimes there is a detriment to having too many hats and too much choice. We talked about in an earlier segment the paradox of choice. That it's seemingly at surface level beneficial to have a lots of choice, but the downside is that sometimes having too much choice delays decision making. So if you're one of those people that has too many hats, and I'm gonna classify myself into that category, because if you could only see in the other room, you know, the number of hats, and again, for me, it's too much, but for somebody else, it could be nowhere near enough, right? You know, again, that's the whole collector mindset and how collecting is so different for everybody else, for every different person. But for me, I find that because I don't like the variety doesn't exist to the degree that I like. Sometimes I find myself like having to choose between two, three, four different type of hats. And when I could, you know, if I didn't have all that choice, I could have just grabbed that hat that I had instead of choosing between. I could have gotten and be done with my day and like maybe go off on a walk already. So there is a downside, and the more hats that you have to choose from, the more you have to be forced to that decision. And again, that doesn't sound like a big decision to you. For me, for somebody like me, it just takes time, time that I could be devoting to, I don't know, just straight walk, getting my walk started already. And the quicker I can start that walk, the quicker I can finish that walk, and the quicker I can get back home, and get my live stream started and done with, and get on with the rest of my day. So just those kind of considerations, I don't know. I don't know if that's something, that's one of those things that I find that I want to ask to my fellow hat nerds. You know, do you run into that same situation, right? And with your hat collection, you know, I go, this stream is posted on what hat are you wearing today? Like that thread. And hopefully, like I said, I'm going to apologize preemptively if I'm breaking some sort of rule by posting in that thread. I think this live stream, this hat chat stream is consistent with the spirit of that thread. So, you know, unless I hear otherwise, I'll continue doing that. But that's always a question I have for my fellow hat nerds that I'd like to like discuss in real time. Is okay, given the state of your collection and your hat wall or your hat, you know, repository, what have you, do you find yourself running into like that kind of decision paralysis that uh, um, where you start your day, if you're somebody that wears your hats every day, kind of like I uh, do you have trouble with choosing what hat you're going to wear that day? Maybe it's more of an outfit thing. Like for me, I have kind of like a small set of like these guayabera shirts that I like to wear. They're Cuban style shirts. And I'm almost always having the black undershirt underneath that I'll cycle through. So that's an easy decision. So like for me, it's kind of like maybe it's similar to somebody else where they'll like, okay, I'm definitely wearing this top or this outfit today. Now it's like it's easier to choose what hat to go with it based on my outfit. I mean, I think that's one of the rubrics that I tend to kind of use, if it's possible, right? And there might be a situation where I just don't have an outfit that goes with that hat. I mean, I have a lot of black hats. That tends to be a non-issue anyway. The black hat kind of goes with everything. Um, but yeah, does that cause you as much pain sometimes as it kind of seemingly does to me? And I know those are probably first world problems. I'm not trying to make it out to be like some sort of huge issue to start my day, but it is something that I've noticed. It's big enough issue that I notice it, and it starts making me want to rethink like the state of my collection, right? Um, and I don't know. I try not to fixate on the hats that I've gotten rid of. I always like to think of it as they found a better home now. If somebody really wanted it, that they offered me money and they wanted to give it a new home, I always tend to think of it as it's probably in a better spot. Somebody's probably using it more. They desire it more. They value it more, and it's much better off in its new home. But yeah, that's just me. I think with collectors, that would be another question, right? For my fellow hat nerds, do you have any kind of like remorse for any of the hats that you've gotten rid of? If you've gotten rid of any, I know that conceivably there's probably folks out there, especially on the Fedora Lounge, that they've never gotten rid of one of their hats. I'm super curious about that. Because I've seen some ridiculous hat collections, from my fellow hat nerds where, like my whole more than one, less than 100 would like they probably blown way past that. 100 probably is just a drop in a bucket. And is it like for those folks, it's like, have you ever sold anything in your collection or given away? Maybe some folks like, I won't sell a hat, but I'll give away a hat. That's fair. I think that's a really good thing. I've done that. I've gifted hats. I talked about my dad. I gifted him, a modern bowler that I came across that was way too big for my head, but it was just right for his noggin. And it was a great. He's something that he wears regularly and he enjoys. I'm actually planning to start to. I'm planning a trip out to the New York City area very, very soon, and I'm gonna reunite with my dad. I'm gonna try to take a photo of us together. So I have a Stetson bowler that I really love. That I'd like to bring that to New York and be able to photograph myself with my dad, both wearing our bowlers. So if I'm able to make that happen, I'm going to post that. I'll use the posting feature on YouTube to make that happen, and maybe use that as a post. I also talked about my lamentations of not being able to actually ever meet my dad's dad, who was I guess he was a fellow hat nerd that's no longer with us. And, from the stories I gather from my dad and from other members of the family that didn't know him, he was somebody that never went anywhere without his hat. And luckily, I have a photo. That will be something. Maybe that'll make that the first post I post on. Um, I post on YouTube here. I think I posted it in on the Fedora Lounge. I know I've posted pictures of my dad, and I actually made a specific thread about the bowler I got from my dad. Again, not show quality, like just like any of my hats. None of my hats I consider show quality, although some of them are a lot more pristine than others. Because even if I acquire them in show quality, they're probably not going to stay in show quality. And it's not because I abuse my hats per se. It's just for me, they're functional. Like, I mean, they're also stylish, but I try to use these hats. And when they don't get used, that's when I start rethinking whether they should be part of my collection to begin with. And, I in my end number of hats that I have at the moment, there are definitely several examples where I'm like, I don't use that hat nearly enough. I know why I bought it, but I think it's time to figure out how to part ways with the hat and give it a better home. So, over the course of like these hat chats, I'll probably, run through the entire collection. Unless it's a hat that I'm like, I can't. Like, I don't know what I was thinking when I got the hat. I think that's something that we can definitely commiserate on is the hubris that is the buying of a lot of these fine hats, where you're like, wow, I clicked that button, that buy button prematurely. And again, I just think that comes with I think that's just I'll chalk that up to general human nature and the fascination and the pull of consumerism. You know, yeah, like I said, I'm somebody. If you talk to me, you know that I kind of try to fashion myself a minimalist, but I'll tell you one thing that my hat collection, as well as having to move all my stuff recently, I find out what a bad minimalist. I don't know. Maybe I'm not. Maybe I'm a great minimalist. I don't know. I think that's a word that's widely misconstrued. That a minimalist is somebody that has very few things. I don't take that. Like I don't espouse that definition of minimalist. For me, a minimalist is somebody that has all the things that they need and very little else beyond that. And if they do have that, meaning they have more than they need, then they start rethinking, meaning they start triggering that same itch that that I just spoke about of wanting to rehome that thing, and find it a new home. Because yeah, like I said, I think one of the benefits of living in the time where and in a place where you are able to acquire things that you don't necessarily need when you are able to do a lot more of your wants, right? We talked about Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where you meet all your basic needs and now you're in a position, because you've somehow worked, so maybe even you were born into a position where you never really had to, do without, and you happen to acquire a bunch of stuff that you just never needed. You probably never needed it, and maybe you needed it at some point. You no longer need it anymore, but you wanted it. All right. The question of wants versus needs, and again, that's another whole nother spectrum that we can get into in another segment. But if you somehow, some way, I think that applies to a lot. I think, and again, not to kind of jump the gun, I have no idea what everybody's financial situation is, an individual situation. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of variability in terms of means overall. But I tend to think that a lot of us on the Fedora Lounge and some of our Facebook groups, we have ridiculous collections because we've had the blessing of being able to meet our basic needs. And we got into this hobby, or were born into the hobby for those folks that are multi-generational hat wearers. We somehow we found ourselves into this kind of subculture, and we had the good fortune of being able to uh, justify the means to acquire whatever we've happened to acquire, and it brought us a little bit of happiness, and I am thankful for that. I think that is there's no shame in being in that position, um, and I'm appreciative of it. It's not something that falls that doesn't go beyond my thinking that, hey, Luke, you just happen to have the ability to be able to have a collection of anything. I don't have a collection of cars. I have a few watches that, that are very near and dear to my heart. And that's great. I am very thankful for that, and I never lose sight of that. And you know, if I'm able to sell or even give away, a hat to a good home, then I don't think I would hesitate to do that. I haven't hesitated to do that. And it goes with a lot of the stuff that I've managed to acquire. I think I have more computers now than I care to admit. I think the benefit of that, of having so many like computers, is that I've learned a lot more about computers than I think I ever had in recent memory. I've even gotten a chance to in recent years to become kind of a semi Linux nerd. Again, I will say semi because I know that I'm nowhere near the Linux nerd that you'll see here on YouTube, and that exists. But yeah, I've learned so much about operating systems that went beyond like this Linux operating system that I otherwise probably would have never have if I didn't have like a spare laptop that was just really old and I wanted to repurpose and just couldn't run Windows anymore, at least not efficiently. And it opened up a world of Linux where I was able to revive machinery that otherwise would have gone in the trash heap, right? Um, I mean, obviously, this is a little off topic, but it's definitely something that's in fitting with the idea of um, the subculture or the idea behind like repurposing something old, and giving it new life, which I think it's part of, I think, some of the allure of some of the hat collecting that I see um, on the Fedora Lounge, right? So we talked about what hat are you wearing today. There is also a thread that's related that's called what hat are you working on today. We have some tremendous folks with some really great skills on the Fedora Lounge where they will take a hat that I'll look at the before pictures. If I saw that before picture, I'm like, that's a goner. That hat has no life left in it. And somehow they will work some magic. That's something that I don't know. I don't know if I have the time or the ability to be able to do something like that. I do see the allure of being able to do that. That is tremendous, because let's say you have more hats than you know what to do with. If you took a hat like that, and I just think there's tremendous pride in your craft and in your ability to be able to take a hat that by any like somebody like the untrained eye like me would look at that hat and would say, that what can you do with that? You know, we even still see it in the what hat are you wearing today? It the name escapes me, but you know who you are if you ever watch this stream of just the transformations, the before and after of somebody taking a hat uh, and taking it from where it's completely unusable because the sweatband is just non-existent. It's got moth bites to all get out, and the felt has been used and abused. And they will take that hat and revive it and make it into like something that I would probably consider show quality, you know, for somebody like me. Like, I mean, you look at my Homburg here, you can see like there's a, you know, a bite, some sort of fraying in the band. You can obviously see the patina on this hat. Again, regardless of how old the hat is, it's obviously a hat that was used prior to me owning it and probably outdoors. So if I'm looking at the patina on this Moores Homburg, then I'm like, okay, whoever wore this wore it outdoors and probably exposed it to the sun rays and gave it its, you know, for me, it's unique patina. And you can see some, you know, some dirt here. I'll give you a confession is, you know, I have a hat brush that I will go and I will pass through the felt. So, right, I'll use the typical on the top of the felt, I'll go counterclockwise, right? The whole countertop brushing methodology. And then on the other side down here, I will go clockwise just to be nice to the felt, at least according to the knowledge that I've gained in, you know, on Fedora Lounge and on YouTube. But beyond that, I don't steam my hats. If I get a hat, happen to acquire a hat that has some sort of like, you know, something like this, it doesn't bother me. I mean, not in the least bit. And maybe it should. I will photograph it just like that. I will, you know, in my twisted brain, I will somehow come up with some way to say maybe the previous owner wanted it that way. I don't know. Or maybe they just used it enough and that's just the current state of it. You know, for me, I'm like, okay, when I see the pictures, like, so if I'm buying a hat online or I'm buying it in person, and I'm like, it got to me this way, somehow, some way, because the owner was comfortable with the previous owner was comfortable with it being this way, or it got stored that way. You know, for me, the only thing that would bother me is a super duper dusty hat that is obviously caked in dust, where a simple hat brushing will do it. The only time my hats see water is if somehow, some way, I got caught in an unexpected rain shower and I didn't happen to have an umbrella. And I don't like that. I'm not a big fan. Like, I know that a lot of these hats are capable of withstanding the elements. I mean, they were built so that to protect you from the elements. A little bit of water is probably not going to be that detrimental to your hat. Let's be honest. But I try not to get it completely soaked. It's just one of those things where I'm like, then I start thinking about the sweatband underneath and how soaked that is. You know, it's already got to contend with my sweaty forehead. We don't need to add anything else to it. So I try not to go out in the rain. I don't like doing that anyway, regardless. So yeah, I guess in terms of my level of fastidiousness, I go to that level. That's a question that I also have for my fellow hat nerds is like, what are your non-negotiables in terms of hat care? Like, what do you do like religiously or do every single moment, you know, regularly, you know, your hat care or your hat maintenance routine? You know, for me, I have hat boxes. I'm a kind of more of a hat wall kind of guy, even though like, I don't have a hat wall at this moment. So I do have a decent number of hats that are living in a hat box, you know, in another room. But yeah, for me, I tend to find like I'm more of like a hat wall kind of guy. So I might just be resurrecting my hat wall very soon. But I'm curious as to what your kind of either day to day or weekly or monthly, whatever your regimen is in terms of hat care. And what does it, what is it? You know, do you steam your hats regularly? And I see folks that are like big proponents of steaming, and I see other folks that were like, no, I'm not so into steaming. I'm one of those. It's not that I don't think it's good for the hat, although I have some kind of inclinations towards that. I think there's too much of anything is a bad thing. So I do think that there is such a thing as over steaming a hat. But I think for me, it's just kind of like sheer laziness in the fact that I don't care enough, to want to do that. Like, for instance, this hat right here seems like it was steam shaped. It's not very pliable. So it's set, right? I have these side indents. I kind of like got a teardrop shape that probably Kevin steamed the hat into. And I'm like, okay, I bought it this way. I'm going to keep it this way. Like I have my hat. So yesterday I wore my Borsalino velour, and that hat is got a felt that's super pliable. Yesterday I wore it with the center bash, and I had some side indentation, so I had kind of like a Twin Towers type of hat top on it. And like after yesterday, I basically just all I had to do was just take my fist and get rid of the side dents. And now, right now, as it stands, it's in the next room and it has no dents. It's just that Borsalino, and I think a lot of Borsalinos have that kind of pliable felt where you don't even need to steam it. I mean, other than like wanting to clean it, if you want to actually have it set, all you have to do is hand bash it, a dry bash, right? I think that's what the term is dry bashing your hat. No steam needed. Like the felt is that pliable and that malleable where it will kind of take whatever shape you choose to give it. And that's fascinating. That's great. In which case, it's perfect for me into shaping however I choose. But if it's a less pliable and less malleable felt, so like right now, this hat will probably not release these center dents. Not that I would want to anyway, because I really do like the way it looks. Kevin, if this was your handiwork, then thank you. But I am okay with the hat just being the way I received it. I had a Homburg, a Dobbs Homburg that I recently sold. I love that hat. That if I have like a little bit of remorse, that might be one of them. Even though it was a well-loved hat, that was something that I had disclosed to the buyer to say like, hey, just FYI, before you make this decision, just make sure you know that the sweatband's a little cracked. This is not anything that's for somebody that really wears a lot of hats. They'll know that it might just be a function of like my skin being a lot more detrimental to certain hat bands, because I know that some of my hat bands, I wear all my hats. Some of my hat bands don't take the beating that some of my other sweatbands do. That's another question I kind of have for the folks that can, will find the stream later. Is what do I don't know how to tell. Like, I don't know how to tell when I grab a hat whether a sweatband is going to hold up for me until after I've already like seen it, like, crack. So that Dobbs Homburg, I have some photos of it. Maybe I'll post some photos of it, and maybe the new owner, if he finds this, then he'll post some photos or maybe even give me some video of it. But that was a fantastic Homburg. Also had a nice little brown patina. I think for me, the one reason that I got rid of it was probably this Homburg. I mean, only because like I think technically this Homburg, I don't know if it comes across on camera, but it's technically a blue Homburg. Like this felt is definitely a dark, I don't know, maybe that's called midnight blue, but it's definitely a blue fedora. And it's a nice contrast. So maybe with the contrast with the band and the trim on the trim on the trim on the rim. whatever I forget the name, but that contrast makes it look very black. And I guess in my mind, the Dobbs Homburg that I had was also black, like a legitimate black, and it was kind of close. And I'm like, okay, well, I don't need two Homburgs that look pretty much identical to each other in my collection. And this gentleman made me a fair offer, and I'm like, you know what? I actually already had dealt. He was a repeat client, and we had done a successful hat deal prior. And I'm like, you know what? That's a fair offer, given the condition of the hat and the fact that it could probably use a new home. And so I got rid of it and found it a new home. And hopefully the gentleman enjoys it as much as I did. That was a hat that came to me not even bashed. I think I still have photos of the hat before it was even ever bashed. I don't think it looked like one of those that just never saw a bash. So it looked like a kind of a Hamburg style bowler, and with no bash. And I promptly gave it as soon as I got it, gave it a nice center back. I feel like that's my style. Is if I have a hat that is able to be hand dry bashed, my first go-to is giving a nice center bash, and then I'll take a stepwise approach. I'll see how that lives. That's similar to what I did with my Borsalino. And if that takes well, then maybe I'll go with the two center dents, and see if that lives well. And depending on how that lives, I'll either keep it or I'll go right back to the center bash. And again, there's a lot of variability as to whether some of my hats will take, right? So some of them are really easy to center bash, but they won't take the center dents, without having steam. And that's like my personal time to say, I'm done. Like, I am good with the hat. Like, at this point, like, I will just stick with the center bash. I will keep it without the center dent, the two side front dents. And the hat has told me it does not like it. At least not without steam, because I just don't. Besides the fact that I don't have a dedicated steamer, I know you can use like a tea kettle. I just don't want I don't want to go through that. So maybe, and it's not like I'm religiously opposed to it. I just don't, like, from my lifestyle right now, I don't want to get into the process of having to steam and re-steam and that whole rigmarole of hat care, of hat business. Again, to each his own. If that's something that you personally enjoy, because I do see the allure of you going through that process and enjoying it. Like, I could see that. I can see how it can be therapeutic. But then again, some people find gardening therapeutic. Not me. Yeah, I'm like, that's somebody else. I like walking and occasionally talking in front of the camera, for you fine folks. And yeah, to each his own. Again, that's the beauty of this hat or fine hat subculture. I'm going to keep using the term fine hat until I stop using it or somebody says, hey, that's actually inaccurate. But I think that's the way our subculture distinguishes itself from those folks that favor ball caps and trucker hats and whatever other hats that don't fit the designation of fine hats. I just think, as I say this and as I use it, I do recognize that it does kind of sound a little pompous. But whatever, humor me here, because until I find something else, if I find a nomenclature that's less pompous sounding, then I will switch up. But I am a creature of habit. It does seem kind of I'm setting a little bit in my ways here. Anyhow, we've had basically no real engagement. We had one visitor to the hat stream, and that's okay. I didn't get a comment posted, but I feel like this is a good stopping point for this sixth segment of Hat Chat. Um, if you happen to come across this, I'm trying to make this a regular segment. Right now, I've been doing this daily. I'm going to try to keep this going for as long as I have the energy to keep it going. But if you find this, then hit my video up with a like if you can. Maybe even subscribe, right? I think that seeing some of the numbers, I'm definitely into wanting to grow this community. Doesn't mean I have to grow this community, but I feel like the more engagement I get in terms of likes and comments and channel subscriptions, I feel like that's going to keep me going and creating this hat content. Again, um, I'm not pretending that this is like some mind-blowing content. This is just, again, just like my description says, this is just some middle-aged guy bloviating about hats, and sometimes I'll talk about my New York Mets, who lost again, by the way, yesterday. So I think that's 4 straight losses, or maybe 5. Whatever, we'll do it again tonight or today. I don't know what time the game starts, but wish me luck, and unless you hate the Mets, and that's fine too. But yeah, I'm gonna close out the segment now. Thanks for joining me afterwards if you happen to do that. I hope you all enjoy your Saturday, and until the next Hat Chat, stay hatting.